The cruelest kind of rejection is the one delivered with a smile. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off champagne glasses and polished marble floors as nearly 300 guests gathered to celebrate Ryan Beatmore's engagement. Laughter drifted through the room like music, warm and effortless, the kind of laughter shared by people convinced they were standing on the winning side of life. At the center of it all stood Ryan, confident in a tailored black tuxedo, one hand resting lightly on the arm of his fiancée while cameras flashed around them. And near the back of the room, almost invisible among the crowd, stood Vanessa Brooks. Her dark blue dress was elegant but simple. No diamonds. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to compete for attention. She had come because Ryan personally invited her. At least that was what she told herself. Then Ryan raised his glass. The room gradually quieted. Conversations faded. Avery turned toward him. A familiar smile crossed his face, the same smile Vanessa once believed meant safety. Tonight, he said, is proof that life rewards people who keep moving forward. Applause followed. Ryan nodded gratefully before scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on Vanessa. Some people, he continued, his voice smooth and deliberate, are simply not meant to come along for the journey. A few guests exchanged awkward glances. Others laughed softly, understanding exactly who he meant. Vanessa felt dozens of eyes shift toward her. Ryan never said her name. It didn't need to. The silence around her did the work for him. For a moment, she looked down at the untouched champagne glass in her hand. Teeny bubbles drifted upward beneath the ballroom lights. Then she placed the glass on a nearby table and quietly smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. Because she refused to let them see that it did. Ryan had spent years believing her silence meant weakness. The crowd believed it too. Vanessa turned and walked toward the exit. No dramatic speech. No argument. No tears. Used measured steps across polished marble. Baying hair, laughter returned. Music resumed. The celebration continued as if she had never been there. Old City, the cool Manhattan night wrapped around the city. Traffic lights reflected across wet pavement. Towering buildings glowed against the dark sky. Vanessa exhaled slowly and started toward the sidewalk. Then she stopped. Waiting beside the curb was a black Rolls-Royce Phantom. Its engine purred quietly beneath the city noise. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out and opened the rear door. Vanessa frowned. There must be some mistake, she said softly. The chauffeur handed her a cream-colored envelope sealed with a gold emblem. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were 3 words that made her heart stop. Vanessa Brooks. Personal. And suddenly, the worst night of her life no longer felt like the end of the story. Vanessa stared at the envelope for several seconds without opening it. The gold seal reflected the glow of nearby streetlights, elegant and unfamiliar against the cream-colored paper. Around here, Manhattan continued moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Taxis rolled past. Traffic lights changed from red to green. People hurried along the sidewalk carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Yet something about that envelope made the noise of the city feel distant. The chauffeur remained beside the open Rolls-Royce, calm and patient. Not once did he check his watch. Not once did he ask her to hurry. Finally, Vanessa slid a finger beneath the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was thick and expensive. At the top was a name she recognized immediately. Arthur Kingston. Founder of Kingston Global. One of the most respected business leaders in America. Vanessa frowned. She had never met him. At least she did not think she had. Heiress moved slowly across the page. The message was brief. Almost surprisingly brief for something that looked so formal. Vanessa Brooks. If you are reading this, it is finally time. Please join us next Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning for a private family matter. Transportation will be provided. More details will follow. Arthur Kingston. That was all. No explanation. No reason. No indication of why one of the wealthiest men in the country would know her name. Vanessa read it again. Dana. Dear Tim. The words did not change. The mystery only deepened. There must be some mistake, she said quietly. The chauffeur shook his head. I was instructed to deliver the letter directly to you, Ms. Brooks. Who sent you? Kingston Global. Vanessa looked back down at the paper. A week ago she had been focused on ordinary things. Rent. Work deadlines. Grocery lists. The small routines of a life rebuilt after disappointment. Now she was standing beside a luxury vehicle worth more than most homes, holding a personal invitation from a billionaire she had never spoken to. None of it made sense. During the ride home, the city lights blurred beyond the tinted windows. Vanessa sat quietly in the back seat, the letter resting in her lap. Her mind drifted toward questions she could not answer. Why here? Why now? And why did the words "it is finally time" feel less like an invitation and more like the beginning of something that had been waiting for years? When the Rolls-Royce stopped outside her apartment building, the chauffeur handed her a small black card before leaving. You may need this next week. Vanessa turned it over after he drove away. Embossed in silver lettering were 4 words. Kingston Family Estate Access. She stood frozen on the sidewalk. Across the street, a television inside a restaurant window was replaying clips from Ryan's engagement party. Guests smiling. Cameras flashing. Champagne glasses raised in celebration. Vanessa watched for only a moment before turning away. She slipped the card and letter into her purse and walked toward her building. What she did not know was that somewhere beyond the city skyline, inside a sprawling estate hidden behind iron gates and centuries-old oak trees, an entire family was already preparing for a gathering that would change every one of their lives. And none of them had any idea that the woman they had never heard of was about to become the center of it. Some secrets do not stay hidden because they are protected. They stay hidden because nobody thinks to look for them. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Vanessa went to work. She answered emails. She attended meetings. She bought groceries from the same neighborhood market she had visited for years. From the outside, nothing appeared different. Yet every night, the cream-colored letter rested on her kitchen table like a question waiting for an answer. By Wednesday, curiosity had become impossible to ignore. During her lunch break, she searched for everything she could find about Arthur Kingston. Articles filled the screen. Interviews. Business awards. Magazine covers. Financial reports. His face appeared everywhere. Silver-eyed. Reserved. Disciplined. A man who rarely spoke publicly unless necessary. Yet one detail appeared again and again. Arthur Kingston had no history of random generosity. Every decision carried purpose. Every move followed logic. Which only made her situation more confusing. Why would someone like that know who she was? Late Thursday evening, rain tapped softly against her apartment window while she sat at the kitchen table studying the letter once more. Her eyes drifted toward a framed photograph on a nearby shelf. It had been taken nearly 20 years earlier. Vanessa smiled faintly. She had almost forgotten that version of herself. Back then, she worked double shifts at a small diner outside Philadelphia. Life was simple. Exhausting, but simple. One memory surfaced unexpectedly. A rainy afternoon. An elderly man sitting alone near the window. His coat soaked through. His hands trembling slightly as he counted a handful of dollar bills. Vanessa remembered because she had paid for his meal when she noticed he was short on cash. Not out of charity. Not out of obligation. Simply because it felt like the right thing to do. The memory lingered for a moment before she shook her head. Millions of people help strangers every day. It could not possibly mean anything. Still, the image refused to disappear. Friday morning arrived beneath gray skies. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black luxury sedan stopped outside her building. Waiting on the rear seat was a garment bag and a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Business attire requested. Transportation departs at 9 o'clock. No signature. No explanation. Vanessa looked out the window as the city slowly woke beneath the clouds. Something about the entire experience felt unreal. Yet every instruction had arrived precisely when promised. Every detail had been planned. By 9 o'clock, the sedan was moving north through quiet roads lined with towering trees. The skyline gradually disappeared behind them. 40 miles later, iron gates emerged from the morning mist. Beyond them stretched an estate unlike anything Vanessa had ever seen. Rolling green lawns. Stone pascuas. Gardens larger than public parks. The main residence stood in the distance like something from another era, elegant and imposing without needing to prove its importance. The driver slowed near the entrance. Luxury vehicles already filled the circular driveway. Men and women in expensive suits stepped from imported cars. Their expressions carried confidence. Entitlement. Expectation. They looked like people arriving to collect something they already believed belonged to them. Vanessa stepped from the sedan and adjusted her coat. Nobody paid attention to her. Nobody recognized her name. She was just another stranger entering a world that clearly did not belong to her. At least that was what everyone assumed. And somewhere inside the estate, behind closed doors, a sealed document waited for the exact moment when every assumption in that place would begin to fall apart. People reveal who they are when they believe nobody important is watching. Vanessa followed a uniformed attendant through the grand entrance of the Kingston estate. The ceiling soared nearly 30 feet overhead. Sunlight poured through towering windows and stretched across polished stone floors. Portraits of past generations lined the walls, each one framed in gold, each one silently watching the growing crowd. The atmosphere felt less like a family gathering and more like a boardroom disguised as a mansion. Small groups stood together speaking in low voices. Expensive watches flashed beneath tailored sleeves. Conversations drifted from investment portfolios to private foundations and vacation properties. Nobody seemed sad. Nobody seemed reflective. Whatever respect they held for Arthur Kingston appeared secondary to the question everyone wanted answered. Who would inherit the empire? Vanessa accepted a cup of coffee from a passing server and found a quiet seat near the edge of the room. She noticed the way people glanced at one another, measuring possibilities. Calculating outcomes. Across the hall, a tall man in his 40s confidently discussed expansion plans for one of Kingston Global's divisions as though the future had already been decided in his favor. Nearby, two women reviewed family connections and ownership percentages on a tablet. Everyone seemed certain that bloodlines would determine the outcome. Vanessa remained silent. She did not belong to any branch of the Kingston family tree. At least not as far as she knew. An hour passed. Then another. The anticipation in the room gradually thickened. Shortly before noon, an elderly attorney entered through a set of double doors. Conversations immediately stopped. The room settled into an uneasy silence. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "The formal proceedings will begin shortly." As people took their seats, Vanessa noticed a large photograph displayed near the front of the room. Arthur Kingston stood beside a fountain, smiling faintly beneath the afternoon sun. Something about the image felt familiar. Not his face exactly. The expression. Calm. Observant. Almost curious. A memory stirred again. Rain striking a diner window. A tired older man sitting alone. A cup of hot coffee placed in front of him. Vanessa frowned. The memory had returned several times over the past week. Stronger each time. She remembered offering the man pie after learning he had skipped lunch. She remembered sitting with him for 10 minutes during a quiet period between customers. She remembered him asking questions that seemed unusually thoughtful for a stranger. "What do you want your life to mean?" What kind of person do you hope to become? At the time, she assumed he was simply lonely. She never asked his name. He never offered it. The memory faded as movement near the front of the room drew her attention back. The attorney opened a leather folder and reviewed several documents. Then something unexpected happened. Before beginning, he looked directly toward Vanessa. Not briefly. Deliberately. Recognition flickered across his face. Vanessa felt her pulse kicking. Around her, nobody noticed. The room remained focused on the inheritance. The fortune. The future. Yet for the first time since arriving, Vanessa sensed that someone in this estate knew exactly who she was. And somewhere behind the carefully organized ceremony, a story that began 20 years earlier was quietly moving toward the moment it had been waiting for. The people who expect everything are often the least prepared for surprise. The attorney adjusted his glasses and placed both hands on the leather folder resting before him. The room settled into complete silence. Outside the tall windows, sunlight spilled across the estate grounds, but inside, every ounce of attention was fixed on the future of the Kingston fortune. Vanessa sat quietly near the back, still replaying the strange look the attorney had given her moments earlier. It was not curiosity. It was recognition. Before she could think further about it, the attorney began speaking. He shared a brief statement about Arthur Kingston's life. His achievements. His discipline. His belief that character mattered more than status. Several family members listened politely. Others checked their phones beneath the table. A few appeared impatient. They were not there for memories. They were there for numbers. Then the reading officially began. The first announcements were exactly what everyone expected. A charitable foundation received additional funding. Long-time employees were awarded trust accounts. Several properties were distributed among distant relatives. With each name called, people nodded, whispered, or exchanged measured smiles. Everything appeared predictable. Yet Vanessa noticed something unusual. The attorney seemed to be moving carefully through the documents, as though he was delaying something. Saving something. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward her side of the room. Across the aisle, a confident man in an expensive navy suit leaned back comfortably in his chair. Earlier, Vanessa had overheard someone mention that he was Arthur Kingston's nephew and current executive vice president at Kingston Global. He looked completely at ease. Like a man already imagining his future office. Nearby, two cousins quietly discussed board positions and voting rights. Nobody appeared worried. Nobody seemed uncertain. They all believed the most important pages had not yet been read because those pages belonged to them. An hour passed. Coffee was served. The tension slowly increased. Then another unexpected guest entered the room. Vanessa recognized him immediately. Ryan Whitmore. Her breath caught for a moment. Ryan stepped inside wearing a tailored gray suit and the familiar confidence that seemed to follow him everywhere. He greeted several executives near the front of the room with easy smiles and firm handshakes. Apparently he had business connections with Kingston Global. He never looked toward the back rows. Never noticed Vanessa sitting there. Or perhaps he simply assumed she could never belong in a place like this. Vanessa felt a strange calm settle over her. Days earlier, his opinion had felt heavy. Important. Now, surrounded by a mystery she still could not understand, his presence felt smaller than before. The attorney continued reading. More assets. More trusts. More distributions. Yet the largest questions remained unanswered. Finally, he closed one folder and opened another. The sound alone seemed to change the atmosphere. Conversations stopped completely. Chairs shifted. Even Ryan straightened slightly in his seat. The attorney removed a single sealed document from the folder and placed it carefully on the table. His expression became solemn. Deliberate. Important. Then he looked up and slowly scanned the room. His eyes settled once again on Vanessa. This time, there was no doubt. I knew exactly who she was. And whatever was written inside that final document was connected to her in a way that nobody else in that room could possibly imagine. The difference between confidence and certainty is that certainty does not need an audience. The sealed document remained untouched on the table for several long seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire room seemed suspended between expectation and reality. Vanessa watched as the attorney carefully broke the seal and unfolded the pages inside. Even the relatives who had spent the morning whispering among themselves sat perfectly still. Across the room, Ryan Whitmore folded his hands and leaned forward slightly. The confidence remained on his face, but now it was mixed with curiosity. Whatever was coming next clearly mattered. The attorney glanced down at the document before speaking. This section contains Arthur Kingston's final personal instructions regarding succession and long-term stewardship of his holdings. Several heads immediately lifted. The words succession and stewardship carried enormous weight inside a room filled with executives, family members, and advisors. The attorney continued reading. Arthur's voice seemed to emerge through every line. He wrote about responsibility, integrity, character. He described success not as accumulation but as service. Some listeners appeared moved. Others appeared impatient. They wanted specifics. Ownership percentajes. Corporate control. Numbers. Yet the attorney continued methodically through each paragraph. Then he paused. His eyes drifted toward the audience once more. Before naming my successor, he read, I wish to explain why this decision was made. A ripple moved through the room. Vanessa felt her pulse kicking. The attorney adjusted the page and continued. Arthur described an afternoon nearly 20 years earlier. A rainy day. A small diner outside Philadelphia. He wrote about entering unnoticed. About sitting alone. About observing how people treated him when they believed he had nothing to offer in return. Several family members exchanged confused looks. The story sounded completely unrelated to inheritance. Yet the attorney continued. Arthur wrote about a young woman working a double shift. He described her kindness. Her paciencia. The way she spoke to every customer with dignity regardless of appearance or status. Vanessa slowly straightened in her chair. Her heart began beating harder. Around the room, nobody understood where the story was going. But she did. Every detail felt familiar. The rain. The diner. The conversation. The attorney's voice remained steady. She did not know my name. She did not know my position. She did not know my resources. Yet she treated me with a level of respect that many people around me failed to demonstrate even after learning who I was. Vanessa stared at the floor for a moment. Memories returned with startling clarity. The elderly man asking thoughtful questions. The extra slice of pie she had given him near closing time. The long conversation about purpose and perseverance. She had never imagined the encounter mattered. The attorney turned another page. Across the room, confusion was rapidly replacing confidence. Family members looked at one another. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Ryan's expression narrowed. For the first time all day, uncertainty appeared in the room. The attorney finally lowered the document and took a slow breath. Then he spoke words that instantly changed the atmosphere. The individual described in this statement is present here today. Silence crashed across the room. Every eye began searching. Every assumption began cracking. And for the first time since arriving at the estate, Vanessa realized the story was no longer moving toward her. It had already reached her. There are moments when a room full of powerful people becomes completely powerless. The silence stretched for several seconds after the attorney's announcement. Every face in the room carried the same question. Who was it? Heads turned slowly from one side of the hall to the other. Family members studied strangers. Executives scanned the audience. Advisors exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody knew where to look because nobody expected the answer to be sitting among them unnoticed. The attorney allowed the silence to settle before returning his attention to the document. Arthur Kingston wrote these words less than 6 months before his passing, he said calmly. Then he continued reading. Success reveals character, but anonymity reveals truth. During my life, I met thousands of talented people, hundreds of influential people, and more wealthy individuals than I can remember. Yet one person demonstrated a quality I could never teach, purchase, or manufacture. Genuine kindness without expectation of reward. The room remained motionless. Vanessa felt her hands tighten slightly around the armrests of her chair. The attorney continued. For nearly 20 years, I quietly followed her journey. Not her finances. Not her achievements. Her character. I watched her endure disappointment without bitterness. I watched her face hardship without surrendering her dignity. I watched her continue helping others despite receiving little recognition herself. Murmurs began spreading through the room. Several relatives looked visibly uncomfortable. Others appeared annoyed. The story was no longer moving toward family legacy. It was moving somewhere unexpected. Then the attorney reached the final page. He paused once more before speaking. After careful consideration, I have decided that the future stewardship of my holdings, foundations, investments, and controlling interests shall be entrusted to one individual. Every person in the room seemed to stop breathing. Even Ryan Whitmore sat completely still. The attorney lowered the page slightly and spoke with absolute clarity. The sole heir and successor to the Kingston estate is Vanessa Brooks. The room froze. No gasps. No whispers. No immediate reaction at all. For one impossible moment, silence became larger than sound. Vanessa blinked once, certain she had misunderstood. Then twice. Across the room, several people stared directly at her. Others turned toward one another in disbelief. The confident executive who had spent the morning discussing future leadership looked as though someone had removed the floor beneath him. Ryan's expression changed first from confusion to recognition. He says locked onto Vanessa. For a brief moment he appeared unable to process what he had heard. The woman he had publicly dismissed days earlier was now sitting at the center of the most important announcement in the room. The attorney continued reading legal confirmations, ownership structures, trust arrangements, and succession procedures, but many people were no longer listening. Their attention remained fixed on Vanessa. She sat quietly, almost motionless. No celebration. No triumphant smile. No dramatic reaction. The same woman who had entered unnoticed remained exactly who she had been an hour earlier. Yet everything around her had changed. Then the attorney read Arthur's final personal sentence. The greatest investment I ever made was not in a company. It was in recognizing a person whose value the world had underestimated. Vanessa lowered her eyes for a moment. Across the hall, disbelief still hung in the air like a storm that had not yet decided where to land. And as reality slowly began replacing shock, the people in that room started understanding a truth that would become impossible to ignore. The future they had imagined no longer belonged to them. Money changes many things, but the fastest thing it changes is how people look at you. The minutes following the announcement felt unreal. Conversations that had filled the estate all morning had disappeared. The room remained locked in a strange silence as attorneys distributed folders containing legal summaries and succession documents. Vanessa accepted hers carefully. The embossed Kingston crest on the cover felt heavy in her hands. Across the room, people who had ignored her hours earlier could no longer stop looking in her direction. Some stared openly. Others whispered behind polite smiles. A few seemed genuinely curious. Most appeared shocked. The executive who had confidently discussed future leadership sat motionless, reading the same page repeatedly as if the words might eventually rearrange themselves into a different outcome. They did not. The facts remained unchanged. Vanessa Brooks now controlled the voting interests, foundation authority, and primary succession rights attached to one of the most influential business empires in the country. The attorney calmly answered procedural questions while financial advisors reviewed transition schedules. Yet the emotional center of the room had already shifted. It no longer revolved around the Kingston family. It revolved around the woman nobody had noticed when she arrived. Vanessa remained composed. She listened carefully. She asked practical questions. She signed nothing. Celebrated nothing. The more extraordinary the situation became, the quieter she seemed. Then she felt someone approaching. Ryan Whitmore. He stopped beside her chair and waited several seconds before speaking. For perhaps the first time in years, he appeared uncertain. Vanessa, he said softly. Hearing her name from him felt different now. Not because of the inheritance. Because the confidence behind it was gone. Vanessa looked up politely. Ryan. He glanced toward the folders spread across the table. I had no idea. Vanessa held his gaze for a moment. Neither did I. Ryan laughed nervously, though there was no humor in the sound. This is incredible. Vanessa said nothing. He continued speaking, filling the silence. People often do when they become uncomfortable. Arthur Kingston must have seen something very special in you. The words lingered between them. Years earlier, Ryan had stopped looking for value in Vanessa altogether. Now he was searching for explanations. She noticed the difference immediately. Before she could respond, a senior Kingston executive approached and asked if she would join a private orientation meeting regarding governance responsibilities. The invitation was respectful. Professional. Important. Ryan stepped aside automatically. Vanessa rose from her chair. For a brief second, their eyes met again. Ryan seemed ready to say more. Perhaps an apology. Perhaps a compliment. Perhaps something else entirely. But Vanessa simply nodded and followed the executive toward a private conference room. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the estate grounds stretching across hundreds of acres beneath the afternoon sun. The scale of everything still felt impossible. Yet one realization was becoming increasingly clear. Arthur Kingston had not given her an empire because she was powerful. He had given it to her because she had remained herself when power was absent. Inside the conference room, advisors began outlining corporate structures, charitable initiatives, and strategic responsibilities. Names of companies, foundations, and investment groups filled the presentation. Then one slide appeared that immediately caught Vanessa's attention. Among the major business partnerships listed under Kingston Global was a familiar name. Whitmore Strategic Holdings. Ryan's company. Vanessa read it twice. The partnership represented millions of dollars in annual contracts. Significant enough to influence future growth. Significant enough to matter. She remained expressionless as the presentation continued. But somewhere across the estate, Ryan was beginning to understand something that had not occurred to him until now. The woman he once dismissed was no longer connected to his future through memory. She was connected to it through reality. The strongest victories rarely make the loudest noise. As the afternoon sun began sinking behind the trees surrounding the Kingston estate, the final meetings came to an end. Advisors gathered documents. Executives exchanged business cards. Attorneys discussed schedules for the weeks ahead. The shock that had frozen the room earlier was slowly being replaced by acceptance. Reality had arrived, whether anyone liked it or not. Vanessa stepped outside onto a stone terrace overlooking the estate grounds. A gentle breeze moved through the gardens. In the distance, fountains reflected the golden light of early evening. For the first time all day, she found a moment alone. She rested her hands lightly on the stone railing and looked across the property that now carried responsibilities she had never imagined. Not ownership. Responsibility. Arthur Kingston had understood the difference. Footsteps approached behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Raijan stopped several feet away. Distime, there was no audience. No champagne. No applause. No performance. Used two people standing beneath an open sky. Vanessa, he said quietly. She turned and faced him. The confidence that once defined him seemed distant now. I owe you an apology. Vanessa listened without interrupting. Raijan lowered his eyes briefly. Years ago, I stopped appreciating the person standing beside me. I convinced myself success meant leaving certain things behind. His voice carried genuine regret. I was wrong. Vanessa studied him for a moment. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Simply with clarity. The strange thing about healing was that eventually old wounds stopped controlling the conversation. Thank you, she said. Raijan looked. Surprised by the simplicity of her answer. No accusation. No lecture. No attempt to make him feel small. Just honesty. The silence that followed felt peaceful rather than uncomfortable. Finally Ryan glanced toward the estate. You have an incredible future ahead of you. Vanessa smiled softly. I already did. He just did not know it. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Ryan nodded. There was nothing left to explain. No past to rewrite. No opportunity to reclaim. So many chapters were meant to be understood, not repeated. He turned and walked back toward the estate. Vanessa watched him disappear through the doors before returning her attention to the horizon. The setting sun painted the sky with shades of gold and amber. Somewhere beyond the gardens, beyond the companies and investments and headlines that would soon follow, she thought about a rainy afternoon 20 years earlier. A cup of coffee. A simple act of kindness. A stranger nobody noticed. Life had changed because of that moment, not because she expected a reward, but because character has a way of leaving fingerprints on the future. The world would remember Arthur Kingston's fortune. Business magazines would discuss succession plans and corporate strategy. Reporters would write about unexpected inheritances. But the truth was much simpler. A woman once overlooked by almost everyone had never actually lacked value. The people around her had simply failed to see it. And as the final light settled across the estate, Vanessa smiled and stepped forward into the life waiting for her, carrying the one thing she possessed long before any fortune arrived. Her dignity.